So for those watching online, today we're going to go over the week of Christ, the 70th week of Christ, and we're going to do it much more meticulously than we did it in the last class, in the Vespers last night. And in doing this, I'm going to be counting the days, so we're going to be using a program or a website called Calendar Converter. It's Formulab is the URL is Formulab. So if you look up Formulab, I think it's Formulab .ch. .ch, yeah. And that is a calendar converter. There's also the 360-day calendar converter, and that's 360calendar.com, and that does the same thing. It's in some ways it's a little more user friendly. And you also have the notes, which have I've constructed the calendar from March 28th, 27 AD, all the way to December 31st, 34 AD. And that's the time frame in which Christ's Covenant Week occurs. And in that calendar that you have, it will have each of the months, so each of the blocks are months on the Jewish calendar. And to create those months, we begin the Jewish calendar on the first new moon after the spring equinox. So the biblical calendar differs from the Karaite and the rabbinic calendar in that both the Karaites and the rabbis can have a calendar that begins, the year can begin before the equinox. But in the biblical calendar, the year never begins before the spring equinox. And we also know that the first 6 months are fixed. So once you start the beginning of the year, the first day of the first month, the months go 30-29, 30-29, 30-29. The 7th month could be 30 or 29 because at the end of the 7th month they begin to observe the new moon again to determine the months. And the reason this is that when God gave them Nisan or Abib as the beginning of months, that's the religious calendar. So the religious calendar runs for 7 months, and once you determine the first day of the first month, you know when the 10th day of the 7th month is going to be in advance without observing the crescents. And this calendar produces all kinds of phenomenon when I go through and look at biblical dates that are given to us. So in following these rules, we'll find that there are certain things that occur. For instance, in the book of Ezekiel, which starts on the 5th day of the 4th month in 592, the date there is July 21st, the same as in 1844. And we find the same with the last date that's listed in the book of Ezekiel, October 22nd, 573 BC. That's the 10th day of the 7th month. And when you follow the biblical rules, those things match up. When you follow Karaite or rabbinic rules, you would not get those dates in Ezekiel. And there's other dates as well that we find by doing this. One is in the book of Esther. When the feast begins, it's the Akitsu festival that they have when they have this feast, and all the 128 provinces, all these rulers and so forth, come together, not all at the same time. So he has this feast that he puts on for 180 days. And then he has a 7-day feast. And the 7-day feast is also called the Akitsu festival, but it occurs in the fall. So for the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians, they have a spring feast that starts on the first day of the first month. And that's often when that's when the king counts the years of his reign, is from the first day of the first month in the spring. And if you use the biblical calendar, you'll find that date that they had, 187 days, from the beginning of the first day of the first month. So it was 180 days plus 7 days. It is the Day of Atonement. And that Day of Atonement that year falls on a Sabbath. And there's a whole bunch of things about it. But the point is we can use the biblical calendar to create correct dates. If we use the rabbinic or the Karaite, one is we could never predict the Karaite calendar because it's based on the barley harvest, and we could never know what the barley harvest was in the past. So anyway, the point is that's how I structured this. I followed some specific rules that I've had to draw through trial and error, going through the Bible. And so this calendar we're going to use to deal with the week of Christ. So last night we talked about it, and we said that the 70 weeks are going to end where? What date on the biblical calendar? So you have, this is the week of Christ, the 70 weeks. This is the last week. So this is a week of 7 years. And the 2,300 days and the 70 weeks begin on what day? The 10th day of the 7th month. And so when is Stephen going to be stoned? What date? 10th day of the 7th month. He sees Christ standing. And when I count this here, later, 10th day of the 7th month. When we look at this date is October 12th. Oops, I did this backwards. October 12th, 34 AD. And you can find that in your chart if you look at it. Now, to know how many days that I'm going to count, I'm going to say that we need a 25-20. Christ was crucified in the midst of the week, which is 3.5 years by 3.5 years. And we know that in a prophetic year has 360 days. So we know that 3.5 years is how many days? 1260. It's also how many months? 42, right? So this could be 3.5 years, 42 months, or 126 days. So what I did is I wanted to count 126 days on either side of the cross. Now to do that, I didn't just simply take this date, April 27, 31 AD, but I'm going to write these numbers out here. So these are the Julian day numbers. Julian day numbers, they just start on January 1st, 4713 BC, and they have a reason why they do it, which isn't really important why they start there. And they just count every day. And the Julian day actually starts at noon, and that's for the convenience of astronomy. So it's actually a number. So January 1st, 4713 BC is Julian day number 0. And then the next day is Julian day number 1. And that's how they do this. Actually, it's, I think, 0.5 to be technically correct. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in, if you're using the calendar converter, I have to recognize I'm going to use the Julian calendar, not the Gregorian calendar, because the Gregorian calendar wasn't invented until 1582 AD, so long after the time of Christ. So all dates before that we use the Julian calendar. And so I put in the Julian calendar the date April 27th. And I'll find that I get a Julian day number 1732496.5. What was it again? 32496. So that is the same as April 27th, 31 AD. Does that make sense to people what we're doing with this Julian day number? It's just counting the number of days from January 1st, 4713 BC. And let me see here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to count 1,260 days from this. So what would I have to do to add 1,260 days to this? I think I did that right. So if I put that number in my calendar converter as the Julian day number,
isn't the point wrong?
the point?
Are you adding those two numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah, the point.
Oh, I shouldn't have done this. There we go. So, just going to do this here. April. I know this takes me a little bit of time to do. I'm just double checking that I'm doing this correctly. Yeah, so that's correct. And then I put 3, 3. Okay, so what I get is this date here, October 8th. So I don't get all the way to here. And this then would be the 6th day of the 7th month. So this is 1,260 days. And this is 4 days. So I'm 4 days short to get to the 10th day of the 7th month. Now in doing this, what year, okay, let's look at it this way. April 27, 31 AD, if I add 1,260, and this is day 1260, what day is this? Because I'm counting days, right? So if this is day 1260, you know, October 7th would be day 1259, and I keep going back. When I get to April 27, 31 AD, what day number would that be?
0.
Okay, so we've got 1 or 0. Well, it actually would be 0. And why is that? Because when I added this number to this number has a 0 in it. Not that it has a 0 at the end. But our numbering system, adding and subtracting, we assume a 0. Does that make sense? So a simple way like this, if I take 1 and I'm going to add 1, I get 2. How far is it from 1 to 1? If I have this, 1 BC and 1 AD, which has no 0. How far is it from here to here? It's 1. So it's not 2. So when I count here, this is not year 1, it's year 0. Now if I counted 1,260 days this way, and I use this as 0, so I have 1,260 here, how many days would this be together? If I had 1,260 and 1,260.
Technically 25, 21.
Yeah. If I added them together, if I counted the days from this day, starting at whatever day this is, and going all the way to here, I'd find I have 2521. Does that make sense to people? That is, if this is 0, and I'm doing the same thing I did there, I would have 1,260 days on this side of 0, and 1,260 days on this side of 0. And so if I counted from here to here, just counted the days, I'd have 2521 days. Does anybody not understand this? So for instance, if I went like this, and I had 3 days, and 3 days, and there's a 0 in the middle, and I count the number of days. So this is a day, this is a day, this is a day. This would be 7 days, right? Each of these would be a day. But if I added them together, 3 and 3, I would get 6. So what I'm doing is I'm going to eliminate that 0. I don't want it there. I don't want 25, 21 days. I want 25, 20 days. Now, when we count the 25, 20, we're counting the first year as 0. So if I go from 677 to 1844, I can't count 677 as 1. I count it as 0. I just simply add 25, 20 days to 677. Now, of course, we're going BC and AD, and that can confuse people. But in reality, if I counted from 677 to 1844, and I counted the actual years starting as 677 as year 1, I would end up with 2521. But we don't start at the beginning of 677 and end at the very end of 1844. We're starting near the end of 677 and near the end of 1844. So the actual span of time is 25, 20 years. We saw that with the 2300 days. We begin in the fall of 457, and then we end in the fall of 1844. And if we were to count the actual days from 450, or years from 457, counting that as year 1, and this as the final one, we'd actually end up with 2301 years. But we're not beginning at the beginning of 457, we're beginning in the fall. So when you go from fall to fall, it's actually 2300 years. So I'm just making this clear because this is going to affect a whole bunch of things about this week. So when I'm starting here, this is the cross of Christ in 31 AD. But we're going to see what happens. When I go here, I find I get the date November 15th, 27 AD. And I could do that, write that math out. So if I go back to 31 AD, am I going slow enough for everybody? This is, I know it's a little, might even be tediously slow. So April 27th, 31 AD, we remember we had this number 173,496.5. So I'm going to erase this, and I'm now going to subtract when I do this, if I subtract it like this, I will end up going to November 14th. So I'll just show you by doing this. So 6 minus 0 is 6. 9 minus 6 is 3. 4 minus 2 is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. 3. So when I put this number in my Julian day number, I find I get November 14th. But that means I would have 25, 21 days from this date to this date, if I counted this as 1. So that's why I actually only went 1,269 days. That is, I'm starting at the end of this day and counting this day as 1 when I go this way, instead of counting it as 0. Does that make sense to people? So otherwise I'd end up on November 14th. Now, not that it mattered to me which day I ended up on, but we will find that if we go to 27 AD and we want to find the 10th day of the 7th month, so we said that the 7 years should end on the 10th day of the 7th month. So it should begin on the 10th day of the 7th month. And if you go to the calendar that I created and I find the 10th day of the 7th month, it's going to be September 30th, and it's going to be the 10th day of the 7th month in 27 AD. And so this date here is short. Well, this is short to reach back to here. Now, how many days is it from September 30th to November 15th? Okay, so it's going to be 46, right? So somebody says it depends on where I start counting. So,
Just 1 second.
yeah,
Pause on that 46.
Yeah.
I put 1731, 236.5 in the Julian day. And mine says November 12th. So am I doing something?
because you're looking at the Gregorian number. You're looking at the Gregorian date, not the Julian date.
Oh, the Julian day.
Yeah,
November 14th.
right, November 14th, right? And so we want this actually to be the number 7. So we want that to be November 15th. So this is going to be instead 59.
Oh,
We're subtracting that. That'll be the number we have. And this will be November 15th. So now I'm going to subtract 36 from this, or 46, pardon me. So,
that'd be 191.
yeah, I think that's what it would be. Yeah, so then it becomes September 30th. So when I subtract 46, I get September 30th. Does that make sense to people, how we're doing that? Okay, and that's because October has how many days? 31, and then there's 15 days in November, so that ends up being 46. Okay, that makes sense? So this is the 10th day of the 7th month, and this is 1260, and this is 46 days. So when we look at this then, we see something that is a feature of the prophetic mirror of the two 2520s. That is, if this is paganism and this is papalism going backwards, we would have 46 years at the end. We could also say this is paganism and this is papalism and go this way. But if we did that, this would be 1798, and 1844 would be over here. And the date that it would be the 25th day of the 7th month. And the 25th day of the 7th month, does that have any significance on the biblical calendar? Right? We want to get to the 10th day of the 7th month. So this is 19 years here. And so if I was going this way, saying this is 538, and I wanted to go this direction, I could have this as 1798 and this is 1844, right? Or not, pardon me. This would be actually 1844, and this would be 1863. I'd have to have 1798 over here. Sorry about that. So if I did it this way, this would be 1798. You know, this would be 1844, and this would be 1863 in the prophetic mirror. But this doesn't really line up with this at all. I don't have the 1260 lining up. So you can see I can't go this way. Does that make sense? Why I can't go this way? It doesn't match up. The 1260 doesn't fit in the right spot. Now this 19 years can stay here, but that means I have to go this way. And this is 1798, and this is 1844. Does this make sense, what I'm doing? Is I'm taking these 1260s and I'm saying these 1260s need to represent the 2520 for northern Israel, because the 2520 for northern Israel is a counterfeit of Christ's covenant week. But I can't make it go this way. I can't start over here at 723, this being 538 AD, and this being 1798, because if I did, this wouldn't work. I'd have to put 46 years over here, and I'd have to put 19 over here, and it doesn't yield anything interesting. Now, we could try that. I mean, we could go from the 6th day of the 7th month and keep adding, but we're just going to end up with dates that don't mean anything. So I'm saying that we have to go backwards. And since it's a mirror, we're allowed to do things in reverse. And this already works out. So the 10th day of the 7th month in 1844 is 46 years after the 1260. So to me it's obvious. Is this obvious to everyone else that this is the way that I should do it, that I should go backwards? That I can't really go this way, I have to go this way to count my years. Because we're going backwards, right? So this is 538, this is 723, and this is 742. And this here would be 677. Does that make sense? So there would be 46 days here between this. And so I have the prophetic mirror running backwards. And then I would add 19 days here. And this would bring me to September 11th in 27 AD. Yeah, so I got some nods. People are following what I'm doing. And and I could count the number of days here, but this is pretty simple to figure out. 19 plus 11 is 30. So, we don't need to figure that out. So we got September 11th here. And that date is on the biblical calendar in 27 AD. It's, what was the date? The 20th day of the 6th month. So the 20th day of the 6th month is September 11th. So to me, from what I've done, I've structured this week this way, and to me it seems logical, the way that I've done it. But I've done some things that would not necessarily seem logical to everyone. Some people would just add 26 here, 126 and 126, and they wouldn't take into account that I actually have a 0 in the middle. And they would actually have a span that is 25, 21 days if you counted each day. So I've done that. And then from this, if this structure is wrong, then anything that follows is not going to be correct. So let's look at it a bit more. So when we go from the 10th day of the 7th month to the 10th day of the 7th month, and we count the number of days. So this is Christ's week. So we say his week is a 25-20, right? Because 3.5 years is 1,260 days, and 3.5 years is 1,260 days, and we add them together and we get 25-20. And so we say on the 1863 chart, when it has this, with the 27 and the 34 with the 3.5 on each side, this is really 25-20. Right? But we're saying now that Christ's week in the literal calendar, in actuality, is different. That is, it doesn't add up to 25-20 if I go from the 10th day of the 7th month to the 10th day of the 7th month. Now somebody might argue and say, well, Jesus was probably baptized here on November 15th in 27 AD, and Stephen was probably stoned here on October 8th in 34 AD, right? Because this is 34 AD. And they could try to argue that, but what would that do to the 70-week prophecy? Yes, Andrea.
Allow it to end on the 10th day of the 7th month?
Well, yeah, see, it wouldn't end on the 10th day of the 7th month if it ended here. And so that means that the 70-week prophecy is not ending on the 10th day of the 7th month, and neither is the final week beginning there. So when we count the number of days from the 10th day of the 7th month to the 10th day of the 7th month, if you used your calendar converter, you would find that, again, your calendar converter is going to count this as 0 and this as the final number. So if I go from, let's do this here. So I'll just show you what's happening. So in the calendar converter, I'm going to put the date that I have, September 30th in 27 AD, and the number that it produces, we already had that there before, 173. Is that the number, or do I get too many ones in there? 1731, 191.5. And so I'm then going to put in the date in my Julian calendar for October 12th, 34 AD. And the Julian day number that it produces is 1733760.5. And then what I would do, well, it would be easier to do it the other way. I'm going to put the number above it. And I would subtract them. And what number would I get? And right. So I actually get 2569. But in doing that, I've counted this day as 0. So if I was going to count the actual number of days, I would have to add 1. So it'd be 2570. So when I'm counting the days this way, and I just want to be really clear, I'm not counting this as 0 day, I'm counting it as 1 day. Because I'm counting the actual days from the 10th day of the 7th month to the 10th day of the 7th month. So I'm not just adding, I'm not...
Isn't you at 579?
No. Did I do something wrong?
No, you're right.
No, because I had to borrow the one from there, yeah. Okay, so that means this period of time is 2570. So that's 2520 plus 50. Now I could also, if I wanted to count it this way, I could. I would say it's 2569 and it's 2520 plus 49. Either way is acceptable, right? I mean, it's not like right or wrong to count it that way. But I'm just saying that I am counting these days as actual days, as I'm counting it ordinally. The first day, the second day, the third day, all the way through, rather than just counting it cardinally. Do you understand the difference between cardinal and ordinal? Okay? So that's how I'm counting it. And that's, so I'm trying to be consistent in how I count things and to be very clear on how I'm counting things. So just like I get rid of the 0 with these two 1260s, so that this is actually 2520 days. But if I started here and I just subtracted, the Julian day number from this one, I would find that I would have 2519 days, right? But that's because the math has a 0 in it and I'm not using that 0. Now we know that this is, of course, Pentecost, or a Jubilee cycle of 50 years, but so is 49. So either way, Pentecost is 49 and 50, and the Jubilee is 49 and 50, depending on how you count it, right? So you can count it two different ways. Because we remember that Pentecost was the 6th day of the 3rd month from the 16th day of the 1st month. And then when you count this, you have to count this as 1, not as 0, right? Does that make sense? That when we count 50 days for Pentecost, you're counting this as the first day, you're counting this as the 50th day. But the way we would normally count it is 49 days. That's how, we'd think, how many days is it? And we just do the math, and it's 49 days. But in the way the Bible counts it is 50 days. And that's why I'm counting this way. So far, everybody has not found any faults with this. All of it seems to be correct, right? You haven't been here the whole time, but you understand the logic of what I'm doing so far. And so I'm being very particular in how I do this. I'm thinking everything through. And, you know, to me, that assumption of getting rid of the 0. Now, if I had the 0 in there, you know, I would have got September 29th, November 14th, and September 10th. And it would have affected this whole area where we're going into this direction. But it would have not produced, to me, it would have produced one too many days in this 25-20. Because I'm not counting halfway through the day. But it creates a little bit of a problem when people think about this part of it. So now, we've dealt with the days going this way. But now when we look at the years going this way, we run into a problem, okay? Because when we count years, 25-20, we're counting part of the way through the year. So we're not counting whole years. Like, we're not counting 742 as the first year and, you know, this as the 19th year, because if this is the first year, this would be the 20th year. Does that make sense? So I had to struggle with this idea of how I was going to do it. In a sense, we have one less year in this line than we normally would have. But what I did is I just made this way of looking at it, is that this year here, which is April 27, 31 AD, which represents a year, it has to represent 538. Now technically, 538 is going to be starting at the end of this day, right? Because if you count from April 27th to November 15th, you'll find that it's actually 1,259 days if you just do the math. So that means it'd be 1,259 years, but it has to be 1,260 years. So to do that, I then have to make this 538 sort of counting this as 1, which we wouldn't normally do. So I don't know if that makes sense to people, because it is kind of a little bit tricky. So if I counted the number of years, I guess I should say, because I did it this way here, I'm going to find that this doesn't work out, and that 1798 should be November 14th. But I'm choosing to use this now as a symbol. So I don't care about the actual number of years here, the actual number of days. I just know once I produce this, this is 1798, this is 1844, and this is 538. And so it doesn't matter that this is 1 year short in my math. Now, some people might find fault with that. But to me, it's logically consistent. But you need to know that that's what I've done. So if anybody's going to have a criticism of this, they're going to say, you counted this wrong, this doesn't work out. You need, if you want these years to line up with this, you should have had a 0 here so that you get actually 1,260 years between here, not 1,259. But I'm counting this inclusively. So in a sense, this is this year, this date, which represents a year, represents 539, but it represents the beginning of 538, so I'm going to count this way. And I hope people understand what I did there. You may not. I'm not counting, yes, well, in a sense, I'm counting this differently here on the bottom than I am going this way. So I'm 1 year short. It's like if I counted the actual number of days, it's 1,259 days, but I'm having it represent 1,260 years. So I have to, in a sense, count this as 1. And we don't do that when we go from 538 to 1798. We count this as 0. But I'm going to count it as 1 because I'm getting rid of the 0. So as long as it's transparent, we know what I've done, then we could discuss it and think whether it makes sense or not. So that's what I did at that point. So there's where we are in understanding this week. Now, I'm going to take this last part of it and put it here on a line, just because I think we're going to need a bit more room. So here we have 1844 and 1863. So we're just taking this here, because this is 1863. And I'm just going to continue going here. I just ran out of room, right? So we have 19 years from here to here. So notice now I'm using zeros as I go this way. I can't take out the zeros every place because then the whole thing would be smushed over. So I'm only getting rid of the 0 here to create this 2520. But every time I add 46, you know, if you counted the actual number of years between here, there would be 47 days, right? The actual number here would be 20 if I start at 1. So I can't continually do that. I'm only doing it here where I take out the 0. So I'm only taking out the 0 once. Does that make sense to people? Otherwise, everything becomes contracted. So as we did last night, I thought about it. And actually, even before we get to this, remember what we did to confirm that this was accurate is I went from 538 to 70 AD, which was 468 days. And I just did the days, right? So let's do it this way here. So I better do this just so we see what I'm doing and if it makes sense. So I'm going to start at April 27th, which was because this was how I came to confirm the whole week that it works. So in 31 AD, we got April 27th on the Julian calendar, and that number is 1732496.5. And then if I want to go to 70 AD, I would have to add 468. And that brings me to August 7th. And on your chart, your calendar that I created, we would find that that occurs on the third last page of the calendar. On the bottom row, on the left side, and it says Av and JL for July. And it starts on Av 1, which is July 29th, and Av 2 is July 30th, and Av 3 is July 31st. And you keep going, and when you get to August 7th, at the bottom number, you'll see there's a 10 above it, and that's Av 10. And that's the date in which the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, 10th day of the 5th month, in 70 AD, and in 586 BC. So that's the date the temple was destroyed.
So how did you get the 468?
70 AD, 538 minus 70 is 468.
I got you.
Yeah. So the fact that this covenant week deals with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD meant that I could use 70 AD to confirm my construction of this week. So I structured this week, but now I need to confirm that what I'm doing is not just, happenstance, right? Finding 70 AD on there and finding that the date it produces is the date that the temple was destroyed means that I'm on track in structuring this. Because the chances of that occurring are very, very slim. So, it didn't have to do that maybe, but the fact that it did do that, for me that was enough to know this is not some random thing, because it doesn't do this if I use the rabbinic calendar, and it wouldn't do this if I used a Karaite calendar. It wouldn't produce the 46 years. It wouldn't produce September 11th. You know, I could still get this structure somehow. I could still put 1260 on, you know, if I use the rabbinic or the Karaite calendar. But I'd end up with different dates and different numbers. But if we use the biblical calendar, we end up with this 46 pointing to the 10th day of the 7th month, creating this line on the bottom with these years. And the fact that I could put 70 AD here and it produces the date on the biblical calendar in which the temple was destroyed confirms that this structure is sound. Yes?
Is it in the year 31? 32?
32.
32.
So, yeah, when we go here, this is in the year 32 AD. So this date would be August 7th, 32 AD, in the actual literal year of Christ. But when we create this line here with the dates going backwards, 70 AD falls on this date. So the year doesn't matter because the years are not going to line up because these are different years. But the date, and that's what matters because we have the 10th day of the 7th month, the 10th day of the 7th month. So that means we're using up here biblical dates are what matter. Though here we can see September 11th points to our message. And we know that from 1863, you know, we have these lines going, right? So from 1863, we have the 151 shekels. So that's what we're going to look at next. So if I'm going to take 1863 and I'm going to say, does this line continue into our history? I would use this, right? So 1863 goes to 2014. Now, I could also go to 1989. So let's just do that here as an exercise. So if I was going to add the 126 shekels from 1863, we can find out what date we could produce. So a person could count it out on that calendar, but let's just do it this way. So in 1863, that's September 11th. And that is going to be in 27 AD. And the number that we're going to get is 1731162. 62.5. So that's the Julian day number for September 11th.
Did you put that on the Gregorian?
Whoops, no, it's not the right number. Hang on. What's that?
You put it in the Gregorian, right? 27's the year, September 11th.
Yeah, in the Julian. You go in the Julian, and I wrote the wrong number down. Hang on.
Not the Gregorian.
Yeah, 172. It's 172.5. It's 10 days off. So that's the Julian number because we're dealing with Julian years. Because this is the dates here on the Julian calendar. These are the dates we're using. So we're going from September 11th, and then we're going to add 151. We're going to subtract 151 days because we have to subtract. So if I take 151 off of this, so, right? So that's the number with the 0.5 at the end. Did I do that? Okay, that was 151, right? Okay, I wanted to do 126.
Did that number come up here?
Okay, so that's 151. That brings us, this one brings us to April 13th, 27 AD. So we could just simply add 25 to this. That would give us the number for for 1989. I was going to do that, right? So I just took that off of the 151. I don't know if I should have done that because that might confuse some people. But so the Julian day number for 1989 I guess I better do it this way. 1989 is 126 days backwards, which is 126 years. And that's going to be the Julian day number, 1731046.5. And that's going to give us the date of May 8th. And on our chart, so if you go to 27 AD, am I going slow enough? Like, this is helpful going this slow? I mean, it may seem a little tedious to some people. But I think we have to go this slow to just make sure that this is all working out. So I have May 8th, and May 8th is, I'm just seeing what the date is on the biblical calendar. So it's ER 12. So it doesn't really mean anything to most of us, but it's the 12th day of the second month. And that would be May 8th.
What did you take off of there?
Hmm?
Mine says 13 on the Hebrew calendar.
13?
Julian day is
27 AD? Oh, you're looking at that biblical calendar?
Yeah, Hebrew calendar.
Yeah, the Hebrew calendar's off by a day.
So you got a minus a day all the time?
No, it's not consistent. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. Yeah, but it's going to say ER 13 on the, that's what I'm saying. The rabbinic calendar is not going to give you the same dates because it can be off by a day, sometimes even 2 days. Because theirs is a set calculated calendar based upon a 19-year Metonic cycle with 7 leap years added in a very specific pattern so that out of the 19 years, 7 are leap years and 12 are common years. Okay? Does that make sense? So yeah, it's going to produce a different date. Yeah, so you don't use the Hebrew dates when you use the calendar converter or the 360 day. We're going to be creating a website that produces the correct dates. The Lord willing that we can do that. It's a lot of work. But yeah, and it's a lot of formulas, a lot of mathematical formulas to have a converter that does this for the biblical calendar because all the rules have to be put in. You have to put in the new moons and the equinoxes, all in these formulas to produce these dates. So it's not easy to do. Okay, so it's produced in 2014. This produces the date, the 17th day of the first month, which is April 13th. So I'm just going to draw this over here. So I'm going to put in 2014. Oops, I should put it at the bottom. And this is going to be April 13th, and it's going to be the 17th day of the first month. Now, when I did this, as I said, originally I did this in my head, and then I found out I was correct when I actually got to the computer and counted it out. But I was hoping that it would land on the 14th day of the first month. And why would I want the 14th day of the first month for 2014? Yeah, and why is that significant? What? Okay, so we have been marking 2014 as Passover. And the reason we do that is in May 2nd in Samuel Snow's letters, which is the center of a chiasm. And this is February 16th. And this is July 18th. May 2nd is the center, and it's the Passover. So it's the Passover, right? And so, in my mind, 2014 should be the Passover, and it's not. So that bothered me. So what did I do there? Yes, okay. Okay. Let me think about this. How should I do this without erasing everything? Okay, I'm going to do it over on this board. Let's do it this way. So, we got May 2nd, and this is the Passover. February 16th, we got July 18th. And we know that Samuel Snow has another letter written June 22nd, and this is Pentecost. This is 3 days before midnight. And we also have the first day of the first month here, which is April 19th. And we have a Passover here on April 3rd. That's Passover, but it's the incorrect Passover. And Samuel Snow had his letter, here I'm going to add more room. So his letter was first published on February 22nd in the Midnight Cry, which is, this is all from Ezra 6, verse 14 and 19, which deals with the dedication of the temple. And there's the February 16th. And this is the chiasm, so the chiasm goes like this. This is 2 months and 16 days. This is 2 months and 16 days. They're also 77 days, if you wanted to count it that way. And so he publishes his letter in the Midnight Cry on the date of the dedication of the temple, which is the 3rd day of the 12th month. And then it's republished on the 13th or 14th day of the 13th month in 1844, but the Jews believed that this was the 14th day of the first month. They didn't add the 13th month. Same with the Karaites. So this becomes a dividing line between two different Passovers and two different groups of people. So on May 2nd, you have this other group of people that's standing there, and we have tried to say, well, May 2nd, it's the center of this chiasm. Here, the topic of the May 2nd letter is the chiasm of Christ, the midst of the week. And this is the first time in Millerism that they present this idea that Jesus is crucified in 31 AD in the midst of the week. Right, so this May 2nd, it's the 14th day of the first month. And this is Pentecost, the 6th day of the 3rd month.
Theodore,
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed that, but you have 120 from February 22 to June 22, and then you have 30 days till midnight. And February and June 22 is the loud cry, the midnight cry. So you have 120 that goes there, and then you have more 30.
So you're saying
4 months.
from February to June?
Yeah.
Yes, I know about that.
So you have 120, and then you have 29 days that we can make inclusively and make 30.
Yes.
Till midnight.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I noticed these things, but that becomes a little confusing to bring in all these different lines. One, we'll see in Samuel Snow's letters, there's all these 22s. So February 22, June 22, August 22 is when he publishes the True Midnight Cry.
Okay.
That's when he publishes his work. He first publishes it here on February 22, and it has all these errors in it. But when he publishes it again on August 22, he has different arguments, more correct arguments for the 10th day of the 7th month. So yeah, those 22s are important. And doublings, of course, that's what 22 is, 2, which is a double, and it's doubled. 22. And February is the second month, so there's a doubling there. But anyway, lots of interesting things that we can find in this structure. The main thing that we want to point out is that this is a separation of the false priests from the true priests. And this occurred in our history. It has occurred. And it started in 2014 and completed, not 100% maybe. Some people could argue that some people left in 2018, but the groups that left in 2017. Would you agree with me on that? Anybody know the history or have any difference? So, I mean, it does not happen all at once.
You mean the path of the trust? Or
Yeah, that's 2014. And in 2017, we had other groups leaving. What's that?
the tree of life?
Well, Tree of Life is still earlier. That's in between that period. So it starts in 2017 or 2014. And last year, we had the final rebellion. I mean, it still kind of continued, some people, individuals.
Or the Psalm 23? I mean, I'm trying to identify.
Which groups? Well, I don't like to identify
Okay,
groups
sorry.
and people, right? So we should know this history because we were a part of it. So we know that these groups left. And here now, at this time, we don't have the rebellious false priests here. We don't have people who are fighting against the message when it's being presented. We're in harmony. So Samuel Snow says in his Pentecost letter, right, that there was a necessity for this disappointment, and the necessity was, one is to fulfill some prophecies, but it was also to separate these people from us. So the false priests had to be separated. We can't have Pentecost if we're all fighting. Now Judas had to be separated from the disciples. And he's separated at Pentecost. Or not Pentecost, Passover. Right? So Passover separates him. And we can see that separation happens. And in Millerite history, there's two Passovers showing the true Passover, the true people who are following the light and receive the midnight cry. And this other group who don't receive it, even though they might have received some of the light at the beginning, by the time they get to this disappointment, they become mockers. So when you deal with the date, October 22nd, they're saying you're choosing the wrong date because this is Passover, and September 23rd is the 10th day of the 7th month. So if you read the history, that's what happens. The group who rejects Samuel Snow's increase of light also reject October 22nd as a valid date. They don't accept the interpretation that October 22 is the 10th day of the 7th month. Now in our history, this relates to the light that we have. Our light deals with Daniel 11 verse 40 to 45 and the repeat of Daniel 11. So this increase of light was on Daniel 11, and some people accepted Trump at first, the idea that Trump was going to be the last president. But once they left, they no longer accept that. So they don't accept the increase of light that we have for our history. Does that make sense? So there's this consistency that we see in comparing these two histories. So if 2014 marks this, the problem is it's not Passover. Right? That's the problem that I had. Now, Stephen Jameson from Ireland had come up with an idea starting at Pentecost in 31 AD, counting the number of days, and we'll do it here. So I'm going to do the number of days and show you what he did. Is he went to the Gregorian calendar, and he put in 1844, and he put October 22nd. And when he did that, it produced a Julian day number of 2394861. So we got this number. Whoops. 289. What was it again? 2894361. 4861. 0.5. Okay, so you had that number there. And then he went to Pentecost. So he wasn't counting from, because he's counting when Christ begins his ministry in the holy place, which is on Pentecost. to when he moves to the most holy place. And he just wanted to say, how many days is it between these two events? Now, if we're going to look in 31 AD, we would just have to first add 50 days from the 27th of April. So I'm going to do this now. I'm going to go. So first I go 31 AD, April 27th. Now technically Pentecost, so that's the cross. And then I have to actually add 2 days, so I should be correct on that. So we're going to say that's the Friday. So the Sunday, which is the first fruits, that's where you're going to count 50 days from there. And that gives me a different number, so I have a different number, and then I have to add 49 days to that. So that's going to be okay, and that's going to give me March 9th. And so I'm going to just make sure this is correct. So when I go to here, and I'm going to count Pentecost, so I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's actually going to bring me to March 10th, I believe, in 31 AD. I did, yeah, I have to add 50 days, okay. That's right, I count 50 days. Okay, but it's actually 49. Okay, so it brings me to June 10th. What did I do wrong here? Pentecost. Okay, never mind. I was doing this wrong here. I was counting wrong. So it brings me up to, yeah, June 17th is what I should have had as Pentecost in 31 AD. So June 17th. I was doing that backwards. Never mind. So June 17th is Pentecost. And then what he did is he went from that date. Yeah, I was going backwards. So that's why it didn't work out right. So June 17th in 31 AD, and the number I get is 1732547.5. Yeah, 2547.5. And then I would subtract those. So I'm just showing you what he did and why I don't think it really makes much sense, but it's what he did. So I'm going to take 2, 8, 9, 4, 8, 6, 1 minus 1, 7, 3. And I get 1,162,314. What was it? 1,162,314. Yeah. So those are the number of days between when Christ began his work in the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary and when he began his work in the most holy place.
I think it's without 0.5.
What's that?
I think it's without 0.5.
I always keep...
But it's 0.5 minus 0.5.
okay, yeah, forget the 0.5. Yeah, you just forget that. What are you saying?
Yeah, I said that.
Yeah, they just subtract each other. Yes. Okay, so then there's no 0.5 at the end. And then what he did is he he did something that doesn't really make much sense to me. But he said, well, there's, in a 360-day biblical calendar, there would be one day that's the most holy place, and the other 359 are in the holy place. So he has the most holy place. And so he wants to count the number of days in the holy place between Pentecost in 31 AD and the Day of Atonement in 1844. So he divides this number by 359. And is that what he does? No. He divides it by 1844, I think. That's not right. 359. So what did he do? I'm trying to remember.
I think 359.
Yeah, he divides it by 359. That's what he did. But I don't get the right answer. So I can't remember what he did then, unless I did something wrong. I think I got an extra 1 in there. That's what it is. Something I did wrong.
I mean, the days from Pentecost to 1844 shouldn't be in the millions.
No, right. Maybe, yeah, I did something wrong in my math. Let me check here again. So we're going to go, I'm just going to check my numbers. I might have written something down wrong. 1844, October 22, calculate. The number is 2394861. And then I go 31 AD. And the date was June 17th. Yeah, and I go 2, 8, 9, 4, 8, 6, 1 minus 1, 7, 3, 2. That doesn't make sense to me. So 18.
June 17 of what year?
Am I not subtracting it correctly?
Did you say 239 or 289?
Yeah, but
Is it 239?
You have
You said-
289.
you
but
said 239.
Okay, there's the problem.
and you said the one.
There we go.
with the digits.
Yeah, so the answer is different. So the answer is 661. There we go.
I remember it was 600,000.
Yeah, so if I do this again, yeah, so clear. So 2, 3. You know how many mistakes I make when I do stuff?
Out of there.
Take the 1 out. Yes, there we go. That's the correct number, right? Yes. And that's one of the problems I have. Even though I like math, I make so many little mistakes. 2, 3, 9, 4, 8, 6, 1. Minus.
And you divide it with 359. And it's 1844.
With a bunch of decimals.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we take this number and we divide it by 359, this will equal 1844.
0.88 or something.
0.8, whatever, 0.88?
8857. It's almost 100, 1845.
Yeah, it's actually short. So when you think about it, it's actually short of reaching, so if you count those numbers of days, 1,844 years as 365-day years, you don't reach all the way to October 22nd, 1844. But he imagined that, I think, when he had decimal points on there, that somehow he was over, but he was actually under. I don't know if that makes sense to people.
No, why?
Because if you take off the decimals, you don't reach all the way to October 22nd. It's not that you don't pass it, you don't get there.
If you count from Pentecost.
Right, from Pentecost. 1,844 times 359 is 6619996. So you see it's actually shorter. So it doesn't reach all the way, is the point that I'm making. So I didn't like his idea as far as what his result was. But when I was struggling with this, 2014, I simply counted 360 times 1844. And I came up with the number 663,840. And then I counted the numbers of days from April 13th to the 10th day of the 7th month in 1844. And that's how many days it is. So I found that this reaches from this 1844 way over here, right? Way over here in the future, because this is 31 AD, 34 AD. So 810 years in the future. If I count the number of days times 360 times 1844, it brings me all the way back to here. So from here to get to October 22, 1844 is 663,840 days. Does that make sense? So that means what? What does that mean? It means, one is the math is telling us something. It's telling us that this date is not a random date. And the fact that it's the 17th day of the first month, which appears to be a problem when I'm looking for Passover, isn't really a problem. Now, if I keep going this way, and I want to get to Passover, it's the 14th day of the first month, and this is 3 days, or 3 years, and this would bring me to 2017 to be Passover. Does that make sense? Because I'm 3 days short going this way to get to Passover. Yes?
So what you did is, or what you said is basically from 17th day of the first month in the year when Christ was crucified.
Well, the year he was baptized, 27 AD.
Oh, sorry. So the
Yeah,
year
27
he was
AD.
baptized. Okay.
Which represents the year 2014 on our timeline.
Okay. So from that date, which is the Hebrew date,
Yeah.
if you count all the way to April 19th or to
October 22nd,
to October
1844.
22nd, there are 1844 cycles of 360 full days.
Exactly. Okay, so there's, yeah. And so that means that number 1844 and the number 360, which are basically prophetic numbers, match the 17th day of the third month. But it bothered me at first until I found that. Then I knew that this meant something. So then I could do this. I could say, well, if 2014 is important, it's the 17th day of the first month, which doesn't mean anything on the biblical calendar, but if I go 3 years or 3 days back to the 14th day of the first month in 27 AD, then I get 2017. And that means that this is Passover. Now we wanted this to be Passover, but this is the start of something which ends here. So in 2017, what began in 2014 has ended. That's the way that I would look at it. And that's the separation of the false priests. So we have to believe, now we're in 2018, that the false priests are separated from us. And so the next thing that's happening in Samuel Snow's letters is the false priests are separated, and we're moving towards Pentecost, which is the other direction. But as far as the Samuel Snow's letters, the application there is that we are now in organization. Yes. Philip.
First month, the third day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Yes.
So
I mean, it's
don't-
in the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
I don't know if it has any significance.
It's not a significant date within it, but it is in the third day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, yes. Because that starts on the 15th.
Yeah.
Right. So on the 14th day of the first month, 2017 is represented by that date, which is Passover. Now in 2017, I was looking at Samuel Snow's letters. So I was over here looking last year, standing here, saying, Samuel Snow's in May 2nd, that's separated two classes, right? And I said, we were in 2017 at Passover. And then I said the next step is going to be Pentecost, which is organization, and that's where we're headed. Now, I had believed that the separation had already occurred, but then there was a further separation that occurred in 2017 from when I was here last year. But I was saying last 2017 was Passover. So when I look at the chart here, I see 2017 is Passover in this line. So it doesn't mean that May 2nd isn't Passover. It is, because this is all the Passover season, right? This is where now, it's actually at the Passover night that the separation occurs, but this is still Passover season. So 17th day of the first month, this is all part of Passover. But what this is trying to do then is give us some predictions. At least that's the way I looked at it. So then I know if I'm going to go next on this, the next date is the 12th day of the first month. And we had found out that this is the date that Judas betrayed Christ. That's when he went to... Now, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at this, so I think that we need to look at the week of Christ and try to really flesh out the timeline. Because we know on the 10th day of the first month, and maybe I can do this here. I've got both my erasers here. Yeah, I'm just going to erase this if that's okay. So in the week of Christ, this is the Sabbath. That's the day he rested in the tomb. This is the Friday. Here they had the Passover meal. Here's where Jesus is crucified. Well, just before the evening, right? So Passover begins at sunset. They had the Passover with disciples at midnight. If you got the night here, Judas is separated. And then Christ is crucified and he dies and then he's buried, right? So this is the 14th, the 15th, and the 16th, the Sunday. We have Thursday, we have Wednesday, we have Tuesday, we have Monday, we have Sunday. Now on Sunday is the triumphal entry. So this is the 11th. I'll put it up here. 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 5th. What am I doing here? No, 10th, pardon me. I'm doing this backwards. This is the 10th. This is the 9th, 11th, 12th, 13th. There we go. Did that correct this time. So here we have the triumphal entry that happens on the Sunday. And then at sunset, what happens? Anybody know? When he gets to Jerusalem, he has the triumphal entry. When he gets to Jerusalem and he sees the temple, what does he do?
Your house is left unto you desolate.
Right, he cries.
Even when he sees it.
Yeah, he cries, right? So he cries, okay? And then, after the sun sets, he enters into the temple, right? So he goes to the temple at sunset. And what does he do in the morning? Anybody know what he does the next morning? He cleanses the temple. This is the second temple cleansing. Okay, so this occurs. And there's some things that happen. So I'm not an expert on the week of Christ. I know a little bit. But I do know that it's this day here, at least my belief, that Judas Judas goes and betrays Christ for 30 pieces of silver. Okay? So that's what happens here on the 12th. Now so the triumphal entry is here on the 9th, but it completes, right, just as the sun is just going to be setting. That's when they see the sun shining off the white marble of the temple. Then he goes into the temple. So I don't know what he does through the night, but we know in the next morning he cleanses the temple. And this is my understanding of it.
Scripture, and I think even in the Spirit of Prophecy, well, I know Spirit of Prophecy
Can
says
hear
that
you.
for a few days he had been having words, for lack of a better term, with the rabbis, just having discourse, and they were trying to trap him into saying something that would lead them to arrest him. And then,
Okay.
and then he cleanses.
Yeah. So this is something that we should look into, right? So we need to look into this week of Christ. And then I'm saying that this would represent 2019, and this would represent 2021. Now, the triumphal entry then would be on 2022.
You wrote 2014.
That's a 9. Okay. So this is when Judas betrays his disciples. This is the cleansing of the temple. And then you'd have 2022 would be the triumphal entry. Right? If we were going to put this on a line like that. Now, whether I'm making a prediction or not, I don't know. This line may be making a prediction. But I'm just saying that we could put those on there and we could see those significant events going backwards in the week of Christ. Still makes logical sense in what we understand is going to occur in this message. Correct?
Yes.
We expect that Judas is going to betray us. We expect there to be a cleansing of the temple, which is a work done for us. And we could probably put these as waymarks. I'm not the interpreter. I'm not great at symbols. And then the triumphal entry, it could represent something, right? So people would have to decide how they're going to understand these symbols. But that's understanding the week of Christ. That's studying it, and something we're going to have to look at in our personal study. But that's the end of the study for now. And afterwards we can discuss it more if you want. But let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful once again for a new week and for the path that you have marked out for each of us, both in our study, our personal study, in our group study. And we just ask, Lord, that we can continue to open our hearts and minds to your leading. Wherever you lead, help us to be faithful. Give us strength for all the tasks before us. Prepare us and equip us. Help us to cooperate with you, Lord, in all your work. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.